Hi everyone and welcome to this video. In this video we're going to look at data classes, a module in Python that helps us to create classes without having to create data init, data repre and other special methods that we normally use when creating a class in Python. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a simple class. I've created a folder right here and this is going to contain two files. One is going to be for creating a class that's normal and the other class we're going to also create is going to be the same class but implemented with data classes. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create that class. So I'll begin by writing a simple document here, or I'm just going to create a simple comment and then I'll write the class we're going to implement. So it's going to be a class of a person. Now this person is going to have various attributes. It's going to have a first name, and this is actually going to be a string. This person is also going to have a last name. So when they have the last name, this will also be a string. Now, when we have this, we can also have the email of that person. It's also going to be string. Now we shall also create their age. So we're going to have their age as well. So in this case, what I'm going to say is they're going to have their age. Now that we have this, we can create our class based on this field. So I'm just going to come right here. I'll create a simple class. I'm just going to call this class a person class, just like we've documented it. Now, since this is a normal class, we're going to have to create the data init function. So I'll create that with data init, and then it's going to take in self, which refers to the current object that we shall be creating, or the instance. Now this is going to take in the first name, so I'm just going to provide the first name, and this will be a string, so I'm just going to call this a string. I'm just going to put this on a new line. So we're going to have uh, our last name, so I'll just say we're going to have our last name, and this will also be a string. Now we are also going to have our email, so email be a string also. So once we have that, then we're also going to have our age. So when we have our age, I'm also going to call this a string. So right after doing this, then the next thing is going to be to assign each of these attributes we provided as arguments to that specific object that we shall be creating. So I'm going to say is self dot first name. So that's going to be our first name, and it's going to be equal to our first name as we provided as the argument here. Then we're going to do the same thing for, actually this is going to be self the first name, which is going to be equal to our first name. So it seems like we have an error here. So let me correct this and see. Problem is it's fitting on many lines. So let me try to actually correct this. So I have this. It's actually a problem in our indentation. I'm going to just indent this. So when I say self dot, we're going to have our last name, and this is actually going to also be equal to our last name. We're also going to have self dot. This will be uh, our email. So let me reduce this a little bit. So now we have self.email, which is going to be equal to our email. So right now, after doing this, we're also going to provide our age. So I'll say self.age is going to be equal to age. Right after doing this, we now have a blueprint which we can use to create our class. Now let me also provide one extra method to this class. So I'm going to come right here and I'll create a function or a method. I'll call this get full name. I'm actually going to call this get full name. It's going to take in self because it's going to be for every object that you shall create from this class. Now, after having this, the next thing I'm going to do is to basically return our full name. So I'll say return, and then I'll return an f string. So this f string is going to be having self dot first name, and then we're going to add the second name or the last name in this case. So we shall have self dot last name. So I'm going to create two instances or objects from this class. So I'll just come right here. What I'll do is to say that we're going to have person1, and person1 is going to be a person. So this person is going to have the first name. So have the first name, and this first name is going to be, let's say, Sally, and then we're also going to have our last name, and this is going to be Jonathan. So we're also going to have our email. So I'll provide the email right here, and this email is going to be let's say uh, just email at gmail.com. Now I'm also going to provide our age. So let's say age is going to be 23. So I've now created an instance of the person class. I'm going to create another instance of our person class. So I'm just going to come right here and I'll create the instance. So I'm just going to change this to, let's say, John Doe. So let's say I'm just going to call this John Doe. So I'm also going to change the email. So let's say I'm going to change this to testmail2 at gmail.com. And let's say we change the age to 24. So right now we have our class created with the various attributes it has. We've also gone ahead and created two objects or instances of this class. Now if we went ahead and printed these objects, so I'll just come right here. Let me call this person. So after doing this, I'll just come and say print uh, person1. So just going to print person1, then I print our person2. And after printing this, then I'm going to run our file. So I'll pull up my terminal. I'm using git bash. So I'll say python, and here I'm going to run creating a class, then class.py. So we now see that we have our object. So the first thing we've printed is the person object, the first person object, and this location in memory, which is this location in memory. And that is the same for the second object we've created. So this actually doesn't give us a lot of information about the object that we've created. It instead returns a version of our object that we don't understand. That means you need some way of returning a string representation of this class. So the first thing we're going to do is to come right here. So I'm just going to come and what I'll do is to create a repre function that's going to return a string representation of this object. So I'll come right here and I create a simple repre function. So I'm going to call this repre, and then it's going to take in self, which will return a string. So here I'm actually using some type hints, but to keep it simple, I'll just don't choose them, or actually let me use them. So what this returns is a string. So this is actually the return value. So we shall just come and return the string representation of that specific object. So I'll say I'm going to return a person. Now we shall also provide their name. So I'll say their name is going to be equal to, so I'll say self dot first name, and then self actually is going to be these curly braces. Now we shall have self dot last name. So if we went ahead and printed this, then what we're going to have is actually a more readable, understandable string representation of this object. So if I run again, we now have the first person with their name as well as the second person with their name. So let's go ahead and create the same class using data classes. So I'm just going to come right here and create a new file. I'm just going to call this file data class. So I'll just call it data class.py. So within dataclass.py, we're going to create the same class using data classes. Now, just like I explained, data classes allow you to create a class, but you don't have to create the init and the repre methods as well as other data methods that come in when you're creating a class. So what I'm going to do is to copy our simple documentation right here. I'm going to paste it right in here. So when I paste it in here, the first thing I'm going to do is to import our data class decorator. So our data class decorator allows us to create a simple data class. So I'm going to import that. So I'll just come to the top of our code right here. What I'll do is to import it. So I'll say from. It comes from an inbuilt model called data classes. So we shall import that from saying from data classes. I'm going to import our data class decorator. And right after doing this, then I'm just going to come, and what I'll do is to create our class. So I'll create it creating this decorator. So it's going to be at data class. Then we shall create the class. So this class is actually going to be our person. Now the beauty about creating data classes is we use type hints by default. So if we are to create a field such as our first name, so we're going to create our field as first name, and this is going to be string, and then we shall create our last name. So we need to have our last name, and this will also be a string. Now, after creating this, then we are going to have our email. So our email will also be a string, and we shall also have our age. So our age is going to be uh, an integer. So we're actually going to have it as an integer. So just this is enough to basically create our class. So let's go ahead and create our objects. So I'm going to copy the same objects that we created in the first example. So I'll just bring them right here. So when I come right here, I'm going to copy this, and when I come to our data class to py, I'm going to paste this code. So right now we've been able to create our class. Let me remove this. We've been able to create our class just using this limited syntax. So we have less boilerplate code. We don't even have a replay function or an init function. But what happens is if we run this file, so I'm just going to come and run Python, creating a class, and then I'll run dataclass.py. We now see that we have a good string representation of our classes without having to actually write a replay function. So this actually shows us that by default, we do not have to attach an init function or a replay function for us to be able to create objects out of our class, which is good because it helps us to write less code, as well as it helps us to actually write maintainable code. So now we've created our class using data classes. Now the next thing we're going to do is to prove that most of the replay functions, all the functions that we actually attached onto our class, exist within this data class. So I'm just going to create a simple folder right here. I'm just going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this accessing methods. So I'm just going to call it accessing methods, and within this folder I'm going to create a simple file. So I'm just going to call it access py to keep things organized. So what I'll do is to say I'm just trying to actually print to basically import our data class. I'm going to copy this code and I'll paste it within our file. So I'm going to close my terminal. And after doing this, then what we're going to do is to basically access all the methods that we have within our class. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create that same method we have for our class.py that actually returns our full name. I'm just going to copy it from here, and after copying it, I'm going to add it onto our class. And when I do this, I'm going to simply come right here, and what I'll do is to print every method that's within our class. So to do this, what we're going to do is to actually use the dir function. So the dir function basically returns all methods that are contained in a particular class. So what we're going to do is to print this. So I'll just import pprint from preprint. So I'll say from pprint, I am going to import pprint. So I'll just come right here and say pprint, and then I'll specify that what we want to print is dir, and then we shall provide our object. So our object is going to be our class of Python of person. So after doing that, and we're going to run this. So when I pull up my terminal once again, I'm going to clear it right here. So I'll make it a little bit larger. So what I'll do is to say Python accessing methods, and then access.py, and now we see the various methods that are actually attached onto our class without having to write more of that code. So we see the data class fields, we see the dir function, we also see the hash, the greater than or equal to. We can see when we have our init method, we also have our reprint method by default. So this actually shows us that we have all the methods that we need for this class without having to actually implement them. We also see the get full name method that we have actually implemented onto our class. So let's look at how we can be able to attach default values onto our attributes. Now I'm going to create a new folder right here. So I'm just going to call this folder. I'm just going to call it, I'm actually just going to call this creating, actually I'm going to say default values. So I'm just going to call it default values. And within this, I'm just going to come and create a new file. So I'll just call this default.py. So right after here, I'm just going to come and paste in our code. So just going to come and paste in this exact code right here. So we're going to have this code in our class. Sorry for this. I am just going to add this code into our default.py. So we have our class right here. So now we're going to look into how we can attach various default values onto various fields. For example, let's say we have a first name, but if we don't have a first name, then what we're going to do is attach a first value or a value that we shall have to have even when we don't attach a name to that specific object. So in this case, we're going to say, like, let's say this is going to be first name. So I'll just call it first name, and I'll move this variable just down to avoid errors. Then we're also going to have our last name. So let's say we shall have our last name, and our last name is going to be last name for any user that won't have a name. So we're going to have our last name. So what is happening here is that we create a person object, but this person object, even if it doesn't have a first name or a last name, they'll still have a default first name or last name. So what I'm going to do is to actually create an object. So I'll say person one is going to be equal to person. So we're going to have person, and then let's say we're going to attach an email. So I'll say email is going to be equal to, so let's say person one at company.com, and then we're going to have their age. So let's say this person has 24 years, and then we are going to also have the second person object. So I'm just going to say person 2, and this will also be equal to person. Then this person is going to have an email, so this is going to actually be the email, and then we shall say person, and this will be person 2 at company.com, and then we shall also attach our age. So we're going to say that our age is going to be 25. And right after doing this, I'm just going to come right here and I'll basically print this out. So I'll say print person 1, and then I'm going to print person 2. So when you print this, this is what is actually going to happen. So I'm just going to clear our terminal right here. When I run Python, and this is actually going to be default values, and then slash default.py. We now have our person object created successfully, but we have a default first name and last name. So this actually shows you that it's easy to attach default values even without having to basically create an init function. So this is actually good for us, because then when we have fields that are not missing, we actually don't land in errors, but we actually have our fields working like the way they should. Now that you've been able to do this, let's also look at how we can customize our fields. So I'm going to come and create a new folder right here just to separate our code, and I'm going to call it customizing. So it's actually going to be custom fields. So right after doing this, and I'm just going to create this new file, and what I'll do is to call this custom.py. So within custom.py, I'm simply going to have our data class. I'm actually just going to come and basically copy our code for our class, and then I'm going to paste it within here. So right after doing this, and the next thing we're going to do is to look at how we can customize our fields. So what I'm going to do is to basically add another field onto our class. So I'm just going to come right here and call this the full name. So this is actually going to be a string. So I'm just going to come and say string, and it will be equal to. So what you're going to have here is we're going to use a special function called the field function. And what the field function does is to basically customize a field and give us some extra attributes of that field. So I'm going to go ahead and import it. So I'll say from data classes, we're going to import our field function, and then we're going to call it from here. So I'll just come right here and then call it call field. So this field method actually takes in some arguments. For example, it takes in the init argument, which basically specifies if we should include that in our init function, as well as our repre, as well as other functions. So the first function we're going to add in here is going to be our init. So we're going to exclude this from our init method. So I'm just going to say init is equal to, and then we shall say false. Now we're going to do the same thing for our repre. So I'm just going to come and say repre is going to be false, meaning that we shall not even include it within our repre method. So right after doing this, then I'm just going to come and create our object. So for example, if I came right here and if I came right here and created our person object, so I can say person, actually this is going to be our person one, and person one is going to have our person, is going to be our person or our object of type person. So right after doing this, and what I can do is to assign these different attributes. So I'll begin with the email, and let's say the email is going to actually be our email. So let's say we're going to have person1 at gmail.com. Now let's say we're also going to have our age. So let's say our age is going to be 25. And right after doing this, we shall attach a first name. But since we have a default first name, let's just leave it to that. Now, since we don't have a full name, what's going to happen is we will need a way to attach a full name to this particular field. But let's try to print this out. So when I come right here, okay, let me actually try to attach a full name. Actually, let me not return a full name. What I'll do is to actually just come right here, and what I'll do is to say create a password one. And when I save this, I'm going to pull up my terminal right here. So I'll make it a little bit bigger. So when I say Python, and then we're going to have custom fields slash custom.py. We now have our person created, but this person does not have our full name. So if we want to create our person full name without having to actually uh, make that full name from our init method, we create what is called a post init function. So the post init function runs just after we have run our init function. So what I'm going to do is to close our terminal right here, and then we're going to write our post init function. So what I'll do is to come right here and create our post init function. So I'll just come and say def, and this is going to be danda post init, and then it's going to be a post init function. So it will take in function self, which is the current object. Now since we want to attach a full name to that specific object, now what we're going to do is to say self dot, in this case we shall call our full name, and then we shall specify that this is actually going to be equal to self dot, we shall say first name, and then plus self dot last name. So when we have this, then that means we shall have our first name. So let's say we wanted to get our full name. So I'm just going to create another function here, and we shall say def get. So we shall actually say def get full name, and then this will take in self. So we should want to just return self dot full name. So we shall say return self dot full name. And after we've done this, then we're going to print our object. So I'm just going to come right here and actually say we're going to also print self dot full. Actually, it's going to be self dot get full name. So I'm just going to come and say self dot. Actually, it's not going to be self. It's actually going to be password one. So I'll say password one dot get full name, and I call this function. So when I run this, let's see what's going to happen. So I'm just going to come and run this file. So I'll first clear my terminal, and right here we have our method being called. So we have our uh, object printed out in a readable format. We also have our full name being printed to our console. Now the next thing we're going to do is to create frozen objects or frozen instances of our class. So a frozen object is one that we cannot actually change. So when it has its attributes, we can't be able to assign other attributes onto it or change the attributes it has, or it's read only in this case. So we're going to create one. So I'm just going to create copy our class from here, and then I'm going to create a simple folder which I'm going to call a frozen, and this is going to be frozen objects. So frozen objects are just read-only objects. We cannot be able to change any of the attributes a frozen object has. So I'm just going to create a new file and call it frozen.py. So right here, I'll just paste in our class, and then I'm going to make sure I attach all the values onto this. I'll actually even copy our danda reprint method. So I'm just going to come right here to our custom.py, and then I'll add these methods as we created them. So when I come to our frozen.py, I'm just going to paste in these methods. So right now we have our different fields such as our full name, our last name, our email. I'm going to add the age. For example, if we don't have an age, then we shall keep it to 23. Then we're also going to have our email. Let's say our email is going to be person at company.com. So we're going to have our company.com as our email. So what you're going to do, since our data class decorator is actually a function, then it has these different arguments. For example, init, repre, equivalent, or order, and other methods. So if you want to basically return uh, if we want to actually make this a frozen class, or a class that's going to actually create read only, it's actually going to create read only objects, then what we shall do is to just come within here, and what we shall say is frozen is equal to true. And right after doing this, then we can create an instance of this class, and what we can do is to just say person is actually just going to be an instance of person. So without even adding any attributes onto this specific object, we now have this person instance created, and it has all the attributes we have actually attached to it. So I'm just going to run this. So I'm just going to print our person. So I'm just going to come and pull up my terminal. So I'll run Python frozen. Actually, it's going to be frozen in frozen. So right now we have cannot assign field to full name, and this is because this is a frozen object. So let's actually remove this post init. So I'm just going to come right here. I'll remove this, and let's say we now have our first name, our full name being equal to our first name and our last name. So I'm just going to say this is going to be, I'm actually going to remove our full name, so we shall have only this. So when I come right here and run this again, we now have our person instance being created. Now let's say I wanted to add an attribute onto this person object. So let's say we wanted to actually say email is going to be equal to, let's say, test at email.com. So when I save this, I'm going to come and run here. So we actually have it being changed here, but then this is a frozen object. So we can't add some extra attributes onto that specific object. Now let's look at how we can return readable ways, or actually how we can be able to modify our objects and return them as dictionaries or tuples. So what I'm going to do is to create a new folder right here. I'm going to do just like we've been doing. So uh, I'll actually say returning, just call this returning dictionaries. Let me just call it returning dictionaries for now. So I'm going to create a file. So I'm just going to call this dict.py. So I'm just going to call this dict.py. And then I'm going to have our class. So I'm just going to come and copy our class right here. What I'll do is to basically paste it in our dict.py and move our frozen attributes so that you can be able to actually assign attributes onto this class. Now once you have our class right here, I'm going to create a simple object. So I'm just going to call person1, and this person1 is going to be a person. Now once we have this person is going to have these fields as we see them here. So for us to be able to return this person as a dictionary, what you can do is to convert this object into a dictionary. And the good thing is we already have that within our data classes module. So I'll just import it. So I'll just say as dict. So once we have this, then I'm going to save this, and when I come right here, I can say print, then I'll call that as dict function. Then I'll pass in our argument as the object we've created, which is our person one object. And then right after doing this, then I'm just going to simply run this. So I'll pull up my terminal right here. I'll actually go to git bash because I prefer git bash to PowerShell. So I'm just going to remove this, and now we are set. So I'll just run Python, and then I'm just going to say returning dictionary slash dict.py, and now we see that we now have a dictionary representation of our object. Now let's also look at how we can return our object as a tuple. So I'm just going to close our terminal for now, and I'm just going to return, I mean, import our as tuple function. So I'm just going to also come and print this. So I'll say as tuple, and right in here I'll call our person1. So I'll just call person1. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now open my terminal, and what I'll do is to run return in dictionaries.py. So right now we see that our person object is being returned as a tuple in this case. So sometimes you may want to basically compare some objects, for example, by calling the equivalent or the equal or the greater than or less than or greater than equal dunder methods. But in this case, what we're going to do is to basically do that with our data class. So I'm just going to create a folder right here, and I'm just going to call this comparison. So I'm just going to say comparison because we want to compare between two objects. So I'm just going to come, and what I'll do is to basically enter our comparison folder. So I'm just going to call a new file. So I'll just call this comparison. Actually, I'm just going to call this compare.py. And within our compare.py, I'm just simply going to come and copy our class. So let me actually copy our class from here. So I'm just going to come and copy our class here. And what I'll do is to basically paste in here. Now the first thing we're going to do is to actually first give in an argument into our data class decorator. So the first thing we're going to do is to basically add one special argument here, and this is actually going to allow us to order our objects given a certain attribute. So we're going to say order is going to be equal to true. And once we have this, then we can be able to compare between two objects based on a given field. So we need some kind of index that we're going to use to compare between these objects. So I'm just going to create a custom field. So I'm just going to come and say self. Actually, I'm not going to say self. I'll just call this the sort index. And this is going to actually be a field. So I'll say field, and we're not going to include it in our init function, so I'll just say init is going to be false, and then we shall also not want to return this as part of our string representation of this object. So I'll say that our repre will also be equal to false, so I'll just say our repre is also going to be false. And after having this, then what we're going to do is to create a post init function or a post init method that's going to allow us to basically uh, create a sort index. So I'm just going to come right here. I'll say def, and then create a post init function. So I'm going to create this as our post init function. And what this post init function is going to take in is our object, which is self, and then it's going to basically attach our sort index. So I'm just going to compare our objects using our edges. So I'm going to remove this edge. So I'm just going to basically create other edges. So I'm just going to come right here and remove the edge to prevent these errors. So I'll put it just above here. So I'm just going to come right here, and what I'll do is to say self dot sort index. So I'm just going to say sort index is going to be equal to the edge. Therefore, we're going to use our edge as that attribute you're going to use to compare between two objects. So I'm just going to say it's going to be self.edge, and right after doing this, then I'm going to go ahead and create two objects, and then we compare the two objects. So I'm just going to come right here and say that we're going to have a person1, and that person1 is just going to be an object of type person, which is going to have an edge, and this edge is going to be, let's say, 24. Now we're going to also have a person2 that is going to be equal to a person instance, that this person is going to have an edge of, let's say, 30. Now when we come here, what you can do is to say print, and then you can compare between these two objects. So for example, I can come and say person1, let's say, is greater than person2, and let's try to run this and see what's going to happen. So I'm going to pull up my terminal. I hate PowerShell, so I'm just going to come and switch to git bash, and since I've switched to git bash, now I'm going to run python, and that's going to be comparison.py slash compare. So right now we have sorted x is a field that has no type annotation. We have made a mistake here, so our sort index is actually going to be an integer. So I'm going to sort this out. So when I save this, I'm just going to come right here, and when I run, we now see that this is false. So when we do it the other way, for example, if we say person 2 is going to be equal to person 1, greater than person 1, that's actually going to return true, because now we have the age of the person 2 being greater than the age of person 1. In this video, we've been able to look at different ways of using data classes in Python. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video and found it useful, please let it reach other people by leaving a like. Don't forget to share it, as well as to subscribe to the channel if this is the first time to watch my videos. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.